It's also going to be live on Business World and BW Education website.
Okay. All right. Good.
We are live.
It's my honor and privilege to welcome you to another BW Dialogue on leadership, skilling, education, entrepreneurship. We've called it a BW Education Presents a BW Dialogue on leadership because the person who we are going to talk to has been a pioneer in technology. He's been a pioneer in technology training. He's been a pioneer in skilling and skill development. We have a special guest today, Mr. Rajendra S. Pawar. He's the chairman and co-founder of the NIT Group and the founder of the NIT University, to a business audience, to an education audience, to a technology audience. Mr. Pawar really doesn't need an introduction, but let me formally introduce you to him. NIT is present in over 30 countries. It has impacted more than 38 million people in terms of creating learners and creating skills for them. Also, he's been a Padma Bhushan awardee, and he's been on the Prime Minister's skilling task force from 2009 to 2014. He's served in many CII committees. He's the chairman of many initiatives that are in the technology space, in the data space, and more importantly, now the founder of the NIT University. Welcome, Mr. Pawar, to this BW Dialogue.
Thank you, Dr. Batra. It's a pleasure to be with you and to be on this program.
Mr. Pawar, last 120 days have been very unusual for most people. What's been keeping you busy?
I think they're exceptional days, let me say it. Unusual doesn't give you the right flavor of what's happening. So while we have the huge problem of COVID, I think this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. So it's unprecedented. That word is so perfect. Because here is perhaps the largest scale opportunity to try out new things, because the situation which has been created by COVID is unprecedented. So if we think about education, if we think about technology, you can never create such a controlled experiment where people are forced to work remotely, people are forced to study remotely. So there's a role for technology, and there's a huge set of challenges as well for pedagogy. So I guess this is a very unusual circumstance, these few months, to comprehend the impact and the constraints and possibilities, both for education as well as for technology. So I personally see it as a terrific opportunity and a very exciting time.
And
so
personally, what is the new things that you've been doing? I know you're nurturing the NIT University, but on a personal level, have you been able to pursue any hobbies, do things that you always wanted to do?
Well, I read a lot, so I'm reading more, but I think more than that, the pre-COVID era had commuting time, as all of us know. So that is now saved, and I'm investing a lot of that into my garden, where we grow vegetables, we grow mangoes. So that extra time is going fully into a much closer interaction with nature. Though I'm a great promoter of getting children to get immersed in nature. So whether it's the school or the university where I'm studied or where I'm involved, what we're creating. But for me, this has been a very, very intense engagement with nature. And so a lot of my time, let's say the equivalent of commute time, goes into looking at vegetables every morning, and it's all organic. So I have to find out ways to deal with fungus and insects. But more than that, on promoting pollination, on increasing productivity of the mango plants. I've never had nature being so fantastic, as all of us know. It's the way nature heals itself and has healed itself in these few months is remarkable. So I've observed it very firsthand. I've seen it in terms of the much larger quantum of mangoes I have, and I'm getting ready for chiku now and custard apples. So the flowers and everything's happening. So anyway, it's a long talk, but personally, as I said, a huge opportunity for me to go much closer to nature and observe it and engage with it and do a cause and effect on many experiments there.
Mr. Pawar, you have the knack of being at the right place at the right time. I'm talking in terms of mega trends. Early in the 80s, you started NIIT. Then you started NIS in skilling and development. 10 years back, you started the NIIT University, quietly nurturing it. As I told you, I call you a wave surfer. You're at the, wave, wherever the wave is there, and you ride it and, so to say, have fun. So tell us, how do you spot opportunity, and what are the next few opportunities that you see that COVID has accelerated?
So I think first and foremost is very, very important to recognize a fundamental reality. And that is the reality of luck. And the more you learn in life, the more you realize what an important factor it is. So to be active in this phase of this country's growth, I remember as youngsters, as excited youngsters at IIT, we used to say, we used to envy the freedom fighters and say, my God, what a time they had. So in the 90s, we started talking about the second war of independence, and this was not political freedom, but economic freedom. And we said we are participating in this IT sector. We played a big role, as you know, dealt with the country's foreign exchange crisis, but also did a lot more than that, and created 5 million jobs in the IT sector. But in the 90s, I have to say that my intense concentration was on something else, which was to do with learning, for sure. It was to do with technology, but it was the obsession to start really understanding the one thing that humans haven't understood well, and that's the human mind. So after 2.5 centuries of the industrial era, where mankind mastered how to build and manage machines, we went into the post-industrial era with the coming of information and data and computers. And so I started looking at the 21st century being the century of the mind. That's what I want to call it. That's what I called it then. Basically saying that now the machine and the robots and everything are subservient to us. We can manage them. We've got time now. And now we have to think about information and knowledge, and all of that stuff is the stuff of the mind. And how little we know in the Western world, let me qualify, about the mind, the brain. The Western world sees brain. Whenever you say mind, they think of the brain. And so they get into the matter of the brain to do analysis of cells and so on. Whereas here we're talking of something else. We're talking about what happens in and around the human being. So the century of the mind is all about how we think, feel, emote, interact, collaborate, communicate. So it became very clear that the role of education had to prepare people for the century of the mind, and that technology would play a very important role as a tool, as a subservient tool. So that excitement of that period, and that's why I started by saying this opportunity today is to do all the experiments you want to see how to connect people with technology on all spheres of activity, where the most complex one has always been, will remain, is learning, how we learn, and therefore how we educate. So a lot of energy going into that. And fortunately, as I said, so my 1951 is the year of the transistor. It's also the year I was born. So I consider that to be providence or good luck. So we were around when this technology came in, the science led to the technology. We were active when information was becoming important, and therefore luck is the starting point. And I have to say that, Dr. Batra. Of course, then you want to leverage the opportunity. So the fact that computers were going to come in was clear in the late 70s. And so 81 is when NIT was born, and our mission was bringing people and computers together successfully. That was the mission that stays as a mission to this date. So therefore, we took the initiative at a time when we knew manufacturing of computers will happen, but who will use them? Who will run them? And that gap became very visible. And so we set up NIT with that intent. And of course, it was an idea. We used to say it's an idea whose time has come. There's an old, much older statement. And we said NIT is an idea whose time has come. Because as we started as engineers, we started building a very process-based technology. And technology at that time was the video, remember, color TV was new. It wasn't computers, it wasn't AI, it wasn't MN. It was just TV, color TV. So, and the video, the 3/4 inch huge, cassette player. So we used technology to do teaching because we knew there aren't enough teachers. So from there, we kept pushing the knowledge and our own work through our research laboratory with people like Dr. Mitra and many others to keep looking at all new things on the horizon in technology. So from the linear videotape to the interactive video disc and then the computer itself and then everything that's happened on the internet. So we've been very curiously waiting for the next break in technology to help us deal with this thing of the mind, as I call it. And so it's just the curiosity to keep looking at technology and the huge excitement of recognizing how little we know about the human mind. And if I have to say, when we talk of online learning, it's 90% about the mind and pedagogy and 10% on technology. And both things are revelations. So there's a lot more to happen. And it's just the excitement about these fields which keeps us curious and therefore keeps us at the front end of this field.
Thank you. You make it sound as if, it was, of course, there's luck, there is serendipity, but it's a lot about, being able to spot that and being able to develop that. Tell us, when you were setting up NIT University, which is 10 years back, what were the learnings from setting up NIT and NIS? It was called NIS Sparta. It was into skilling in the early 90s, right? And
yeah.
It was skilling in the true way because you're teaching professionals how to sell, so on and so forth. So tell us.
Banking as well, in addition.
Well. So tell us, today when we talk of skilling and when you're building the university, what are the learnings from NIT days that you're applying there?
So let me first say that while the university started in 2009, we had the luxury of time to think about it. So when NIT was 10 years old in 1990, we had the good fortune to invite two people to be advisors. One was Professor C.R. Mitra, who had just retired from BITS Pilani, which is a classic example of innovation in higher education, the best that I've seen. And also Professor Jimmy Isaac, who had retired from IIT Bombay as the head of, who had set up the computer science department. These were two of my very important gurus. And while C.R. Mitra educated us on innovations in education, Jimmy Isaac was a great person who understood the information society as a concept, information as a concept. And he's the first one who told me that till now, education and skills were two compartments. And the skill was for the factory worker and the farmer, and education was for the enlightened. And he said that IT is the first field where there's a continuum, because Bill Gates, the programmer, becomes Bill Gates, the entrepreneur, who creates exceptional value. And right now, if you see, in terms of value creation, the guys who wrote the program themselves in the beginning and had the capability to become entrepreneurs. So the time was ripe. So we had the opportunity from 1991 when we were reworking the NIT strategy to recognize that while NIT as a company, as a for-profit company, was involved in making people employable and creating talent for the IT sector and taking them from college to a job, which we continue to do. And we've done it just to, as a mental note, you can remember a number which is 36. It's more than 36 years. It's more than 36 countries and about 36 million learners. So we've had the good fortune to try out many things. But we, at that time, were trying to see how do we expand NIT itself. And we learned one thing, that while we were running 3-month, 6-month program, it was becoming a 1-year program, and then would become a 2 and 3 years program. And so my question to Professor Mitra was, it'll start confusing with formal education. So he helped us think through some ideas. And we created a program called GNIT, which is which was
I
the
remember it.
backbone and which created a whole industry. But he told us that GNITs kind of emulates the formal system because we couldn't give a degree. He said, if you have to go to, and that's like a bachelor's 4-year baccalaureate. He said, if you have to do a master's and PhD, that will not happen in a company format because they are just bottomless pits which keep taking money if you have to do master's and PhD. And he said, you'll have to think of a different form. So in some ways, the seed was sown at that time. And then 1996, there was a big debate in the country on the new policy on education, which by the way, is still stuck in parliament, never came out because government was looking at how to involve the non-government sector in education. So that became another point when we were looking at this vantage point. In 1997, 25 years of passing out from IIT Delhi, one of my professors, Professor Indreesan, who later became IIT Chennai director, he challenged all of us who were there, gathered there for the celebration. And we had made a hostel wing, Vijay and I, and dedicated, called it Indreesan, and said, you guys have been too busy making money. Now do something meaningful. So in a sense, these few things in the 90s started forcing us to think. And then we thought very deeply and we talked to hundreds of people to say, if we have to do a university, what should it be? So we had luxury of time. So we identified 4 things, and I want to make a point because we talk about that. Because the university will, at its peak, go to 5,000. It's about 1,200 now. Go to 5,000 students. Not the millions, we've done the millions. So we said, okay, why are we doing this university? What purpose should it serve? And what should be its character? So the purpose we defined was, can we make it a role model of what university education should be? And that's why we put a tagline of NIT University, NU as we call it, the university of the future. And my wish is that even 100 years later, that line remains there because it forces you to stay on the horizon, which is where we've been looking at all the time. So that's one. In terms of making it distinctive, we realized quite early on that unlike the corporate world, and now the startup where you do things in quarters and years, and companies do it in years, universities live for centuries because they take decades to build. Companies last for decades because they take years to build. And startups, most of them last a few quarters because they take a few weeks to build, right? So this realization told us that to make a great university, it has to be a lifelong journey even beyond us. So let's not try and make the greatest university in 5 years. Let's look at a few things in which we should become distinctive in the first 15 or 20 years. And we chose 4 things, and we call them the core principles. And those core principles came out of these hundreds of discussions to see what should we do, which could be contributing to the body of knowledge of how to build institutions. And these were therefore the shortcomings of education that we saw. The first was the gap between university and the employing world, whether it's companies, industry, government. We just use the word industry for that. So we said industry linkage, which in NIT Limited we had done. At our peak, we had 7,000 companies where our students would do a 1-year internship on the GNIT. So we said in industry link, the world knows that these 2 systems are apart. Let us be the first one to show the way of how to do industry linkage. And in 10 years, we've established a lot. That's the first core principle. The second core principle was technology-based. So that comes from our lineage, and now 40 years, that time 30 years. So we said everything we do here should be using technology. The third was research-driven, and this is where we realized we have a gap because the country has a gap. And as a closed economy, we didn't really need research. We had no competition. We had licenses. If 10 booths had to be made, we said, okay, 4 companies, 2.5 booths each is what you do. You can't afford to waste. And that was the right approach at the time of independence. But we should have shed it 20 years earlier than we did. But nonetheless, we shed it in 1991 and unleashed competition. We know what that's meant. So research is becoming important, but still it is not the brightest of our students don't do research in the country. They go abroad and then they come back and do it. So we said, let's put that in the DNA. And when we were 5 years old, we looked at this principle, third, and I'll talk about the fourth, and we modified research to research, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Because the research of the past was $1 billion lab and 20 years to get a product out and 30 years to protect it with IP. That is gone. Now an idea, from idea to market is months with a startup. So the old ideas of IP protection are all gone out of the window. So we said research will be research by research, innovation and entrepreneurship. That is the third core principle. And so we really want to become the school of startups in a sense. And the fourth core principle is actually a philosophical idea, which is seamless. And I could take the whole session, but I won't take it. To me, we chose and actually cajoled Dr. Karan Singh, the
You don't really need an introduction.
eminent parliamentarian, Maharaja, and so on, but one of the greatest
I would
living
call it a cultural czar.
greatest philosophers, I would say. We cajoled him to become our first chancellor when he was giving up his chancellorship. But when he looked at this, when I told him these four core principles, and the fourth one, he said, that's an interesting one. Let me spend a term, but he spent 2 terms. And he was a great guide for us to comprehend the meaning of the word seamlessness, because society is fractured in every dimension. Man versus nature, for example. Rich versus poor. There are millions of divides, silos in everything we do. Every company has departments. Every university has departments and buildings. We don't have. The university doesn't have the department ID. We have areas. Professors can sit where they want. So there's no silos. So seamlessness is perhaps the richest idea. And while the other core principle will change and as we get one off and add the other one, I think perhaps this is the one which will take us forward, because as we go from the era scientific revolution, industrial revolution to knowledge revolution, we are going from the power of analysis of the last many centuries, which divided the world into little pieces. To analyze, you have to break things down, right? You have to learn more and more about less and less. And if you stretch it to infinity, then you know everything about nothing, right? And that's where the world is heading. Now we have to integrate. So the era of synthesis, and I see the century of the mind as the era of synthesis.
Integrated learning.
That idea. So anyway,
Integrated learning.
so yes, seamless, I would say.
You know, when we were preparing for this talk, we titled this Education, the Last Bastion of Reform. In some way, you explained it to us why it still remains the last bastion of reform. But can you tell us why have we not been able to address it? And why do you think we'll be able to address it now?
So first of all, let me just say, when it's the last, I called it the last bastion of reform. It's not only for India. In these 40 odd countries, I've had the occasion to talk to education planners and education regulators and ministers and students. And I find that in every country, it is the last thing to be reformed, and it's not reformed enough. And I wondered why. One answer, of course, is every country protects its culture and should. And culture is embedded in education. And therefore, we are over anxious to protect our cultures, and we unnecessarily overprotect education. So this is one aspect. The second is, and this is a very important point, there is no other product or service on earth where every individual has an absolutely unique experience. And everybody has an experience. So no two people agree. So if you go into any debate on education, you'll come out agreeing with both sides or disagreeing with both sides. So change is very difficult to do. And we have to do much more discussion. So, but yes, of course, so there's a political discomfort with opening up education. There's an administrative difficulty to worry about
legacy.
No, this is now regulators. Regulators think they are protectors of the nation's education system, and they are. But I think when they reach their peak in the role, it is about 45 years or 40 years since they left education, or 30 years. And in their mind, that's the education they were at. Whereas the child of today is doing something completely different. So I would say grappling with this change, to change something and take radical decisions, becomes difficult. And then there is the administration problem. The IIT JEE exam, you're actually not looking for caliber. You're failing 99 point some %, so those who remain. The test is not a selection test. It's a rejection test.
Elimination test.
It's an elimination test. So now when you have to do an elimination test, someone can take you to court. So to protect yourself, you measure what you can prove. And if I ask you, if you have to judge your child, you know that what you can measure about the child is a small fraction of what is really important thing about the child. So therefore, regulators struggle with that question. Therefore, they can't reform it so easily. The education heads also, at the age gap is there. The young faculty, old faculty question is an interesting one to watch. And then finally, I think there's a concern about, is education a social good? And therefore, government should deal with it, and there should be not-for-profit? Or is it an economic good, and therefore should be for-profit? This issue has not been settled. Country after country has tried. US tried to do private, had a reaction. And yet we are now saying a MOOC can come into a school, and we have unsolved problems on how to do this for profit, not for profit. So all these things get in the way of reform. And there are three things to be reformed, I would say, and I'll leave it there. So one is the policy reform, which is about who can enter, how do you enter, how do you exit, how do you run? Okay. So in this country, we don't know how to exit anything, whether it's industry. We don't know how to shut down industry. Government regulation doesn't let you. Leave alone how to shut an institution or how to stop a course in a government university. They run on, they go on running even though they're irrelevant. So how to enter, how to run, and how to exit are complex questions, but entry and exit are policy questions, and we need clarity. Second is curricular reform. Who decides curriculum? I would say unless a child is involved along with the teacher to do curricular reform, it won't be relevant. Where's the child in the equation? Leave alone, where's the faculty in the equation? So curricular reform has to be brought as close to the classroom. And therefore liberating the teachers and the principals and so and so to do curricular reform is something we are too far away from. And if any institution tries to do too much reform, we get regulators coming on them and saying, how are you experimenting with the child life? So curricular reform has to be left. And finally, financial reform. We have to make up our mind, is it for profit or not for profit? And if it's for profit, then change the policy. If it's not for profit, then make sure that everyone who says they are for profit are actually for profit. So these are issues why reform becomes difficult.
Beautiful. I think I relate to most of what you say. And I'd only say that, for the last at least 20 years, we've been talking about these things, and not much has happened. I hope COVID and discussions like this bring the consciousness of the leaders to this very important kind of foundation for the country. I won't say before.
But there's one place where it has happened, and that's a showcase. Look at engineering education. In 1999, there were 90,000 seats for engineering. Today is 1.5 million, 16 times more. There used to be capitation fee. Today, you get scholarships. So I am saying that even in a regulated space, there is a concept of a market. So people, and medical education is still regulated, and there's a capitation fee, I think. Please don't hold me because I don't have proof, but there's a shortage. So if we have learned that in the economic sphere, a market is an important thing. In education, we have to test the ground. In engineering education, we have tested the ground. We have tested the ground, and we've created talent, and the IT sector is competitive because we've always had more engineers than we needed.
Absolutely. We could agree about some of the quality, but that's another debate by itself. But the fact
maybe I should make this point. When we have a shortage of talent, everyone's a hero. When we have surplus, everyone becomes a zero. It's a perception problem. I think it's more than, of course, quality is an issue, it always was. But when we have a surplus of something, we devalue it. And so I want that message to reach everybody who says we don't teach, no one's usable or whatever. It's incorrect. I think our talent is very high caliber. They have potential. And after all, they are going, even if we say they're not employed, but they're still going and becoming whatever they are all over the world. So we shouldn't belabor that point. It's just that we have surplus of engineers, which from an economic point of view is good for this country. But it's easy to criticize because whoever doesn't get a job, we think is no good. And when we had a shortage of engineers, even the last one got a great salary. I was saying that they were great. So it's a wrong notion. That's a subject for another debate, Dr. Bhattacharya.
It is a perception. You're right. It may not be the reality, but it's clearly a perception. Yeah. I just want to ask, last 1 week, results have come out of 10th class, 12th class. You're also a parent. You have 3 children. They're doing well. What is your advice to parents who get too stuck about percentages and marks and not really looking at the, interests of the child, the capabilities of the child, the gifts of the child? What do you have to say both as an educator and as a parent? Give us your insights on that.
So you've touched on an extremely important subject, Dr. Batra, which is that how do children chart their course? First, from junior classes to senior classes, how do they choose their subjects? Then after they choose their subject, how do they choose their institution? And I'll tell you, this is a completely broken system. And I feel the pain for it because ever since we started NIT, I've been looking at this question of how do we bring in students? Because I also have been on the board of my own alma mater, which is IIT.
I have been on the board of IIT Delhi. I'm Bangalore and I'm Udaipur.
Many institutions, many institutions. And we struggle with this question of how do we attract the brightest? And the brightest is often reduced to a test, whether it's a CAT or JEE, because there are 100 people vying for one seat. And administratively, you can't go around meeting everybody. But so I've been spending time with another colleague of mine at the university, trying to construct what we call the admissions bridge. That means the child has to come from school to college. Now look at this funny situation. The child doesn't know which college they'll go to. The school doesn't know which college they'll go to. The parent doesn't know which college they go to. The college doesn't know who's going to come. So I said, why don't the university teachers start going and interacting with students in class 8? However little it may be. And now with technology, it'll be much more. And sensing and sensitizing. And how do we, in fact, we were thinking of doing it from class 10, and then we went to many schools. I myself spent time with hundreds, thousands of kids and hundreds of teachers and maybe a couple of dozen schools, as to when should this dialogue begin and who should be involved. And my current view, and it's subject to evolution, is somewhere in class 7 or 8, children are still dreaming. And we miss those dreams because that's the time now we are descending on them to say, has he got enough marks for STEM or not? Okay. We are completely oblivious to the passion and the dreams of the child. Complete is the wrong word. Many parents are, many teachers are. By the way, some class teachers always, right? But they get neglected in this process. So what is the child's real passion? What are a mechanism to let the child surface there? And keep the child away from the parent and the parent-teacher meeting at that time. But try and capture their dream and let them build on their dream. And let them engage in class 9 or 10 with experts who are from those fields. Bring an artist to a school, bring a doctor to a school, and see which one resonates. And let them start dreaming that and moving in that direction. And maybe in class 10, then subject them to, and I would say subject them to choices of institutions. And then let them start visiting those institutions in the summers for at least 2 years, so that both sides discover each other, not evaluate. They discover. So this admission bridge is an idea because for our university, I'm thinking about 50 schools we want to build this bridge with, and that should be about 70% of our intake, and the others will come because we have to open it to everybody. But I realize how difficult it is. So
it's in some way being very one-to-one on a student and then kind of hand-holding the student to kind of discuss.
One mind at a time.
Yes, I mean, I got where you're going with it. And I think that's the right way. As a father of a young child who's making career choices, I couldn't agree more with you. Let's shift the focus to entrepreneurship. You set up NIT with 2 friends in 1981. It's almost 40 years, it's 39 years. Tell us, what are your learnings of being an entrepreneur for 4 decades, and how are they even more relevant today in COVID times where less is more?
So we didn't use this word then. I have to say, Anurag, we didn't use the word entrepreneur. Otherwise, we would have got mixed up, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the real thing is that I think the starting point is curiosity, really speaking, to search out for unsolved problems. I think that's really the starting point, or an unmet need. It's not about reading reports of this is $1 billion industry or 100 billion. That's the wrong time to start. So it's an unmet need, looking for some things which are needs which are not met. And among the unmet needs, you see which one does your heart beat for. These two, I think, are essential conditions. And if there's a matching of these, then you have a starting point. So, as I said, COVID is a fantastic time to be curious. How many unmet needs are being thrown up right now? So, which one of them does your heart beat for? That's the question. So, everybody in school tells their children, follow your passion. Children also say, follow your passion. Ask them, what's your passion? He says, what's that? So, I'm oversimplifying it to say that there are unmet needs. And by the way, there are many parents who gave up their jobs to do homeschooling because they were troubled by the question that you're troubled with, for example. So, unmet need and what can today's tools, technologies, environment do for us. So, from time immemorial, and for example, the brilliant financial geniuses of Europe knew the value of information. They would fly. First, the guy going on horseback to reach the information from any part of Europe to London first, so that the guys knew before anybody else, and then he went to the stock market and bought the share of so much share. And then, of course, even before that, using pigeons to send information. So there was an unmet need, and there was a value for time, and therefore you did something. So that principle holds, and will always hold for entrepreneurs, that you're going to create value, you're going to solve an unsolved problem, is the demand side of the entrepreneurs. But that may not excite you. But if you look at 5 things and one of them excites you, then you have the makings of an idea. That holds even today. And I said, COVID time is a fantastic time to see how many unsolved problems there are and what are today's tools. So today's advice, or my advice for entrepreneurs, basically I think one is this. Second is, don't outdo yourself in terms of time. Okay. So I have mangoes in my garden. The trees are 25 years old. They were planted before I bought this place. And a very good friend of mine got a good interest in these things. And he said, the 2 varieties of mangoes you send me remind me of my childhood, because what I get in the market are better looking, but they don't quite have the original flavor. So I said, nothing to do with me. A guy who planted this 25 years ago probably got good plants which are not the grafted plants. So you have the genuine thing there. So genuine things take time. So if you went to the Bukhara restaurant and asked him for the kebabs, and the most exotic of them asked him, when did the chef start working on marinating it? It'll go back a couple of days. So same thing about the university. We started cooking it, we had the time. So entrepreneurs shouldn't be in a hurry to outdo themselves, because that's where the biggest mistakes happen. Don't be in a hurry. Be fast. Be fast. Be very quick. Be rapid. But don't be in a hurry to outstep yourself. And that's where most mistakes happen. And if you have private equity, then remember that their business is not your business. They have to get in and get out. So they're very clear that they'll exit after so much time. And therefore, their job is to push you as hard as possible. Your job is to push them back as hard as required to marinate your idea and to create value, because your customer is not the private equity guy. You're not selling to him. And entrepreneurs spend a substantial part of the time selling to the next investor. It's a mistake. Put aside 10% of your time, but 90% has to go to your future customer. What is their need? What are you making? How do you modify it? So that's the second piece of advice. And third, of course, entrepreneurs have always shaped the world and reshaped the world. And as I said, NU wants to be the school for startups for that very reason. So research as done in the billion-dollar lab is 10 years to do. And then you need to protect it so you have intellectual property rights. All is stuff of the past. Yet our current economics is based on those principles. Our economics is based on shortage. Because we know that matter is limited in nature, the finite number of atoms, 10 to the power 73, I don't know, some such number. So if I have 1 kilo of mango, then I want to share it equally with you. We get only half kilo each, right? If I have 1 megabyte of music and I want to give it to you, how much do you get and how much do I have? We've entered with information the world and time of abundance. So the economics of scarcity has broken down, which is why we don't understand what's happening in the .com world. But it's a time to be generous. It's a time to think of everything because yourself, because if you're generous, you can build great ideas. You can. So to me, the university is one such idea. If you can be a role model which everybody copies, very happy for us.
Tell me, why did you say to me that you were 10 years late in doing the university?
No, I said we should have started 10 years earlier because we could have marinated it more. No other reason.
Okay, in that context. Now, there is a big debate during these times that while some of the skills that were relevant before COVID still stay relevant, but there is a new set of skills that is needed to kind of conquer the future or to survive and thrive in the future. Do you believe that there are new skills that are needed? And if yes, what are those skills?
New skills, I'm saying that the 21st century skills articulation done by UN and many bodies is just coming into sharper focus now. So I'll distinguish between skills needed in the industrial era and skills needed in the century of the mind. I'll do it like that. So then you can start looking at critical thinking, right? That's not for machines. Collaboration, not for machines. Okay? Communication with each other, not for machines. So the new skills are about, because remember, in the industrial era, man, machine, materials, there were 5 M's of management I won't go into, but in the men and machine equation, what was man's preoccupation? Was to get man out of the man-machine equation and bring robots, right? So if you reduce the number of workers in your factory who are more profitable. So the preoccupation in the industrial era was get man out of the man-machine equation.
Right.
And now we realize man is back in the center. The mind is back in, that's what's called the century of the mind. So everything to do with emotional, got of EQ, SQ, all of these things, portions are now not about logic and reasoning alone. Logic and reasoning is the bedrock. But you got it under the bedrock. That's the bedrock. Now we're building on that. So they're all mental skills. Mental, emotional, spiritual, whatever word you want to use.
Yeah, so mindfulness.
So mindfulness.
It is very true. I'm talking to you, I'm fully in the conversation. I'm kind of savoring every word you're saying. I think it's very important skill to do well. Being in the moment, doing
listening more than talking.
Absolutely.
We've heard from childhood, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, but we use it in the opposite proportion. But at the university, let me tell you, Mr. Arun Mehra wrote a very good book I want to suggest to everybody on listening. He's a great one. So when he launched the book in the university, we have in the university some old trees. So we got students have made a little amphitheater where about 100 of them can sit under the tree. It's called the speaking tree. So when he came to inaugurate, he said, I want to rename it as the listening tree. And it's called that. And that is where these small discourses happen. And that is where we tell people to listen intently. But then I also encourage our students to go uphill, we have a little hillock and sit alone and listen to yourself. We call that introspection or whatever. So that's a very, very, very important skill. Who's watching you? Don't externalize it. Watch yourself. That's what we term as introspection. So these are the skills. And by the way, with COVID, you're sitting alone, right? You have a lot more time. Sitting with
It's a
your
blessing in a disguise.
yeah, thinking about your own mind. So
You know, I'm able to do
mental,
most of my things ahead of time. These days, if I commit a timeline to someone more often than not, I'm ahead of time or on time. Because I have more time to plan, think, be by myself. And you know, I was telling Prateek when we were preparing, I said the beauty of the conversation I do is I learn so much from people like Mr. Pawar, because really I'm young and have a long way to go. And it's just whatever I have to apply, I'll apply. But it's just, I learned so much. You know, I enjoyed so much that, you know, they may be doing it for a larger audience, but in some way, you know, it's benefiting me. So I totally relate to what you are saying. I want to ask you one more thing, Mr. Pawar. Since the time I've been an entrepreneur, I've been talking about it. I've heard other very big entrepreneurs talk about it, is failure. And I keep saying the reason we haven't built a product company in India is because we only celebrate success. We do not celebrate failure. What do you have to say about that?
So if you can start introspecting and look at your own failures and no one's watching, it'll be less shameful. When everybody's watching, it's just human behavior to feel small. But much of the measurements are imposed on us externally, in education, for example. And there's competition. And there's competition for scarce resources, 1 seat out of 100, only one rank. So now competition has unleashed a lot of energy, but the downside of it is the cost of that on the emotional situation is enormous. And every mother wants a child to come first. Starts from there. Every father wants a child to come first. And therefore, every child wants to come first, but when they don't come first, there's shame, and therefore, there's an externalization of the measurement. But a sensitive parent will not force this ranking on a child. So it's not only about giving positive feedback. Positive feedback generates energy. You feel good. But you have to give constructive negative feedback, because negative feedback helps us change direction. So you need energy, otherwise you can't move. But you need direction, otherwise you go like the Diwali Wali Hawaii, which goes all over the place. So you need both kinds of feedback. Negative feedback is difficult to take, and therefore, if we can teach children introspection, or by children, all of us, so I can look at myself and be my own critic. That is less problematic. So this skill, introspection, is important for that skill. So where did I go wrong? Because I will correct myself. And there's a very important lesson I learned in my life. Everybody likes to change. Nobody likes to be changed.
So it's a voluntary process. It's a
So
process
if you take
of
this,
discovery.
Yeah, if you take this, then I want to change. I better have my own feedback loops, and therefore introspection. And therefore that mental skill and the century of the mind, very important skill.
Beautiful. You could apply this in relationships, business. What you said is so prophetic, that everybody likes to change. Nobody likes to be changed. It's just so prophetic. There are about 10 questions in the Q&A and about 2 comments in the Zoom webinar chat. And 1 question. Mr. Ashok Ogra is asking you, you belong to Jammu. And what are your plans to make sure that there is good education in Jammu? Are you planning to do something in Jammu?
Well, I have to admit that when we were thinking of the university, that was surely on the list as a place, as of many other places. But I did have the opportunity to be on the board of the Vaishno Devi University at the founding time, so I did express myself and participated. But the choice of Neemrana came for a set of circumstances. And I think it's a great choice because it's between 2 cities, it's not in the town. the best quality air. You're still only an hour and a half away from Delhi. So the choice of this place for our experimentation couldn't be Jammu. But we did have NIT centers at the peak of our activity. We still have. And the famous hole-in-the-wall experiment, which started in 1991, I did in my village as well in Akhnoor. So we tried to express it as much as we could, like we have done across the country. But hopefully, at some point, something more.
Yeah, good. While you already alluded to that, there are questions about the role of infrastructure in a post-COVID world. Why do we need physical space? What is the role of buildings? You know, that's the kind of questions coming. For example, Harish Chaudhary is saying, with schools conducting online classes, what is the role of school as a physical entity? What component of education can be delivered online? And what component would need to be necessarily offline? Dr. Sheetal Kapoor is also asking a similar question.
Okay, so let me first talk about from early childhood through schooling, then into higher education, then into your job where you have to keep learning for life. So if I have to simplify this and say that online learning, I would be extremely cautious about exposing young children to it. Extremely cautious. So the screen time concern which all parents have is a very valid concern. Because we still don't know, in spite of every knowledge about education, of how the child's mind learns, how the mind works, but child's mind particularly. Okay, so we have to have the minimum amount of online exposure at very young age, and therefore, as we come into middle and high school, we can give a larger dosage. Then we have this great departure, and we become independent. We are teenagers. We go into college. We want to make our decisions. We are anti-establishment. All the energies are coming out as teenagers. And we are learning to be independent. So we can give more choice and therefore more openness at higher ed level. And once we are working and we are self-directed learners, then we can do a substantial part of it online. So one is this dimension. So when we come to schooling, I would say, even if I'm looking at middle school, perhaps 10% is online, not more. The rest, not necessarily in the classroom itself, but could be you take, and I've seen my children getting educated, going for a camp. One of them went, the school took them for a 10-day camp to Yamunotri. And the children, the class walked along the Yamuna, drove along the Yamuna, came all the way to Delhi. And in 10 days, they saw what man has done to the pure water at Yamunotri, to the Yamuna water in Delhi. And along the way, they saw the nature's degradation over centuries happening in 10 days. And what they learned, and I saw the behavior change on my child, can't be taught in the classroom, can't be taught online. So I think it is focusing us to definitely open our mind at this classroom. The answer is no. But is online the answer is no. If it helps us to open our mind to say different spaces for learning, let's reconfigure it. And at younger age, rather than pushing children out into very early ages into school, I am in favor of saying keep them home for longer. And the parents have to spend their time. Because at that stage is when, and our chancellor of the university, Dr. Kasturi Rangan, recently wrote an article, said that some 86% of whatever has to be formed in the child mind is done by age 8. That's class 3. So be very mindful at that time and very gradually interact and do it in a careful way. So in COVID, the over-expectation on online has gone haywire because that's the only medium we had. So I wrote a small piece which was titled Bored Students and Exhausted Teachers.
I read that.
So I was not being critical. I was only saying that suddenly this thing has come upon us. And teachers are having to scramble to learn very rapidly. And students are having to cope with, instead of having my 30 friends around me and every time the bell rings, we go and socialize. And that's what we remember of school, not the classroom. Now that time I get a few minutes to start preparing for the next session. And I have many children do tricks, right? All of us did. Teachers haven't figured out the tricks that kids have figured out. So, what terrific opportunity to learn. So, we are learning that we can do a lot with IT, but I would put a figure of 10%, not more. 90% is pedagogy, 90% is design, is the settings, and so on. So am I saying that school should be done away? By no means. On higher education, there are questions. That's a separate discussion. But this formative years where we build citizens for the nation, we build responsible citizens for the nation who are balanced and sensitive, who will then acquire various professions and careers and so on. But the character, the sensitivity, the emotional balance, all of that happens in these years. And we have to be very mindful that we are doing the right proportion. And I expect every teacher and every school principal to be experimenting at this time while they struggle to see what worked, what didn't work, and reflecting. Every teacher should reflect every night. What happened in my class today? What did I do right? What did I do wrong? Teachers can be asked to reflect. Kids, tough to get them to reflect, but those who do become fast learners. So therefore, be mindful. Schools are here to stay, but let's engage things outside the school as well. A lot more physically outside. Take the children to the post office, take the children to a hospital, take them to a factory, take them to the neighboring village. Tell them to do farming in the village to come close to nature. At a university, every child plants a tree, and when they leave 4 years later, they've left behind a piece they're stuck to. And a couple of years ago, our dean of students made a very good practice. I'm just sharing a lighter vein. Earlier, and they have to name the tree. Earlier, each of them was putting their boyfriend and girlfriend name, right? And he discovered that after some time, they were not caring for those trees anymore. So he said, okay, I think 3 years ago, he made a policy, you write your mother's name. And they look after the trees throughout. But they are stuck to nature. They observe that tree grow. They see the leaves coming, the flowers coming. So connect people with nature, connect them with villagers, connect them with neighbors, connect them with everything. And of course, use technology wherever you can. But keep it under your foot, not on your head. That's all I'll say.
Beautiful. I want to ask you my last question. You know, Mr. Pawar, you got a Padma Shri, you build a company which had impact. You taught us about 36 countries, 36 million learners, so on and so forth. You in your third phase, you know, NIT, you know, training, NIT technology, and now NIT University. Now, you've done it all. You got name, you got fame, you got wealth, and you had impact. What is left for you to do? Is there a bucket list that Mr. Pawar has?
Well, there's a big list, but I have to say that the list is bigger than it was many years ago. So, for example, the role of technology in learning. So, in our NIT Limited business, you will see new breakthroughs on the digital side. But we have very good people who are doing that. And my role is more to celebrate what they do. And once in a while, positive feedback mostly, but once in a while, negative feedback. But the university is where I think more experimentation has to be done. Because NIT as a company became a role model and created a sector in learning and so on. And we became a player in software. We weren't the role model, but we did a good job. In university, we want to be a role model. And therefore, every dimension has to be studied, researched, and so on. And we have now a new Vice Chancellor who's had the occasion to, an IIT grad, and he studied in the US for masters and taught in the US and then came and taught here. So he's got a wide experience. And the earlier Vice Chancellor settled the understructure of the university in a solid foundation. And so we are now ready to talk much more about the university. We didn't want to keep things quiet as we were doing extensive experimentation. I talked about innovation, if you remember, under the clouds. So this is going to take not more time, but more deep thinking. And that is something I'm looking forward to. And as I said, my passion to grow vegetables and fruits got expression in COVID, thanks to COVID, thanks to using my time for that. So I'm going to do more work from home and try and squeeze more time out for my garden. And I've seen how to do a little bit of nature for nature, and it gives back. It's the best return on investment. Let me just say this now without question. Nature is waiting to give you back 10 times what you give it. Nobody else gives it.
Thank you for saying that. I said it was the last question, but I want to talk to you about a university that fascinates me a lot. And I was contemplating going there this year or maybe next year. It's the Singularity University. What do you feel about what do you feel about their model and what they've done with them, because it has attracted very big names both on the teaching side, imparting of knowledge, and students. So what's your view on the Singularity?
Let me say there is about a dozen different experiments for which they are one and an important one in higher education. A dozen. And so just like we picked 4 areas, many people have picked 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 areas, and they're trying to push the boundary on those areas. So one of them is in human intelligence. And so is the machine intelligence exceeding human intelligence is one of the dimensions what a university like that looks at. And they should look at it, much like others look at, and we are trying to look at startups, for example, as a dimension of research, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Much like we're looking at how does industry link, where we think we are a benchmark. Seamlessness, where you have to go to Shanti Niketan perhaps to see what they did, or study what Nalanda University did, which I'm trying to study. And even earlier, if we can find out something about Takshila, because by the way, they were the first generation of Ivy League. And we have to give it respect and learn. And the second generation, I think, at least was the IIT-IIM, which is post-independence. And the third generation are getting born at this time by people who've done a lot of things in life and now are wanting to contribute in this area. So we will see a lot more of those kind of universities. And fortunately, there are many people in the world who are trying to work, and Singularity is doing a great job as well. So curious people should find these places and find out.
Thank you. You're right that in the US, UK, most of the Ivy League institutions were set up by industrialists, by leading entrepreneurs as a way to give back. You look at Ivy League institutions, and I think the same is happening in India. It's a way of philanthropy. It's a way of giving back. Because as you said, universities are like those mango trees. They take 25 years to give you the fruits. So I think it's a great analogy. So I'm sure the fruits from NIT University in the next 10, 15 years will be like the original taste of the mango that you're enjoying today. So I wish you luck in nurturing those minds.
So one fruit which came out very quickly is 100% employment of every student from the beginning.
Brilliant. And I'm not surprised about that because
the industry linked.
Yeah. When it comes to NIT University, I don't think that's something, I think it's a given with the kind of background you have and the kind of people you've been able to bring as chancellors, vice chancellors. I think it's all about the quality of leadership and the quality of teachers. I think you've been able to bring both there, and with your own vision and background of building institutions. And you rightly said it takes a while. So while you're impatient to do it, but it will take a while. So all the best in building and nurturing the talent of the future. And thank you for talking to BW Business World. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. From the number of questions, though there were about 50 people on the webinar, 49 for most part, but this video content goes out to a larger audience. It goes in the magazine. And it's a very involved, from the comments you can see in the Zoom chat, from the 10 questions. And I'm grateful to you for your contribution to the country in building the careers and destinies of many individuals. And now through NIT University, you're writing a new chapter. So we wish you luck. God bless you.
Thank you very much. And do send me the questions which we didn't have time to answer.
Yes, we'll send you all the questions. But they were in some way, in the 2 questions I took, they were all answered. They were a variation of that. Prachi Chandraramani wanted to know what skills. Dr. Sheetal Kapoor was asking about education technology.
So please send me the questions and the email and contact.
Yes.
Because
And we will. And
please,
I will make it a point to send.
at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Mohan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you.